going to be a challenge.
Let's hit record, Chris.
Yep, thanks, Tim. So, just quickly, Tim gave us an introduction. We've been around for a while. We're based in Brisbane, and basically developing e-solutions from agriculture from back in those days, the very early days. Probably a little bit invisible in many cases because a lot of our software is used by other companies as the underpinning of what the services they offer, and we haven't necessarily, particularly in Northern Australia, be all that visible. So our visibility in Western Australia and Southern Australia until recently has probably been greater than in the North. But you might see the name Soilmate around, NutriWise, NutriPlanner. There are some of our products. We do a lot of the training in the industry. You'll probably maybe recognise Better Soils Management, which is our core module for soil health and crop nutrition. FertCare C, we do probably the major supplier of that training in Australia. I would think we're probably the only one at the moment. And some industry consulting to the likes of GRDC, CRDC, and where we believe, or they believe, we can supply some insights into distributing information mostly. So what I wanted to get onto today is the ultimate focus of this is what we've done with what we're calling Opterra Sugar, which is we've looked at the process for N&P budgets, and it's very messy. Anyone that's tried to do a whole farm NP budget will probably know that. And we've tried to do it in a way that we've called it a collaborative platform where the growers can do what they want to do and the advisor can do what they want to do, and the relationship can be on an electronic platform and shared the responsibility. So that might include the farmer putting in and changing paddock boundaries and crop classes and those sort of things in sugar, whereas the agronomist is going and agreeing where the soil test should come from for the plant cane, and then from there maybe the interpretation and any other considerations that need deeper agronomic knowledge can be done by the advisor, and then reports created. So it's based on a FertCare accredited system and it includes extras to meet smart cane. So we haven't just met the minimum requirements for an NP budget. We've built in there some of the nitrogen tools and other tools that are part of the smart cane toolbox that relate to nutrition. So the context of what I want to say today is about creating a whole farm NP budget, which includes recommendations for individual blocks, because we've got to do that to create a whole farm budget. And that needs to be done on a managed production area, because I don't think growers want to be testing every block and sub-block they have on the farm. So the regulations say that we can group things of like production areas so if they've got similar characteristics, we can group them and sample them as a group. Now, it's interesting that what you've found in the last couple of days is possibly that grouping is at a very coarse level, because ultimately, I suppose there's two sides to grouping. One is productivity, and the other one is potential for environmental loss. So if we're grouping on productivity and there's an equal chance of environmental loss, then we could have the whole farm as one group. In reality, if it was all all showing very even crop growth and probably no yield difference. That's not the reality, because if we've got a sandy soil versus a clay soil, if we've got some other things going on, then they preclude us from going and just doing the whole farm under one soil test. So as part of the context is really what this whole exercise is a zoning or grouping at a block level to ensure the desired productivity and environmental outcomes. And given that we're zoning or grouping, we are doing precision agriculture. So at the coarsest level, that this whole NP budget thing is an exercise in precision ag, and I think that's probably why Tim's got me talking about this, and the detail of how it all fits together. Do other people see it that way, or they just see it a pain in the backside that you got to go and do this thing once a year?
Any comments on that? It's probably right.
Okay, it's a self-fulfilling truth. We're dividing the farm up into things that are similar productivity, similar soil types, and treating them differently if the gaps are big enough. So in the last day, so I believe you've been looking at this block, and obviously maybe from an EM map and the soil test, it shows that there may be differences there, but in fact in productivity there was very little difference. The question I ask is there difference in potential loss mechanisms to the environment as a result of those soil characteristics? So, by and large, as I'm reading this is a sodic area down here, poorly draining, possibly having more runoff than this area. So if we're putting nitrogen on, are we going to lose more nitrogen from here? And how's that going to get into the stream or into a drainage system that might be different from there? I don't have the elevations to know which way the slope's running. I suspect it's possible. Is that a ridge through there, or is it just dead flat?
We did look at that yesterday. I can't remember, but it was certainly wet at the top end. Yeah, we parked there, and water was flowing that direction, which is away from the stream, which is fairly typical.
Yes.
Is that right, Jace? Jace is here now. Yeah, so it's flowing away from the stream.
Yep. Okay, so it's going back towards salt pans, and maybe that's why they're there. It's actually draining back into that area.
Yep.
Okay, so although we can go to a finer level and define that we suspect there may be something, we've always got to remember the plant has the last say in what the variability is going to be based on the soil. And some crops are sensitive. You grow mung beans in there, and I know it'll happen, but sugarcane's a pretty tough old bird, and it will smooth itself out across a lot of soil characteristics. So, you look at an NDVI map, it may not line up with a EM map for sugarcane, but if you put mung beans in there, I'll nearly bet you get a different outcome. So we've got to just be careful the way we interpret that around what's happening to the paddock. So what's all the fuss about with as far as regulations go? Well, we've got some that are on our doorstep, basically 2 weeks away. In the cane industry, that we need an NP plan after the 1st of December. We will need to have a plan in place to be able to apply fertiliser to the farm. But there are other ones coming as well in the grains industry, in grazing. There are practice standards that have got to be put in place in various places. So, that's what the fuss is about. We've just got to get used to the fact that these are in place, and we've got to make the best of what we can to help farmers be compliant or move towards compliance as we move through these dates. In particular, I wanted to concentrate on the sugar, and as I said, the 1st of December is the drop dead date for sugar, as far as getting a plan together ahead of applying any more for the 22 harvest season. And just again, you may need this, but I'll go through this because it is important in the context of things. The initial budget needs to be endorsed by an appropriate person, and you guys, being professionals that are entering the industry, will probably be one of those appropriate persons. And they subsequently need to be checked by an appropriate person every 5 years. In the intervening period, it needs to be updated every year, but it really needs an appropriate person to put their sign off on it every 5 years. Now, that's placing quite a bit of responsibility. If you accept to be an appropriate person, then there is some requirements on there to be appropriately trained, information, and the one that's I think is going to catch some people out, even growers that are able to become an appropriate person, is record keeping, because the records of each year update, and every 5 years needs to be kept for 7 years. So being able to keep records is going to be very important, and in any system that you use. So what's an appropriate person? Professional qualifications, training, skills or experience to complete the budget. Must be able to give an authoritative assessment, advice, analysis of the farm, block management using protocol standards, methods. This is obviously written by bureaucrats, but it's really just saying somebody that's got the qualifications and skills in that particular industry to be able to do the job end to end according to the regulations. Now, farmers can do that where they have the appropriate skills and qualification, and I've got no doubt there will be some out there who want to do it. But by and large, it would seem that that they're going to require some assistance either initially, once every 5 years, or maybe they just want to put the job onto somebody else to update it every year. One of the things in the legislation that is probably glossed over is the fact that it has to be updated every year, which means anything that's coming in from fallow or any other purpose needs to be actually soil tested, and anything that's going out of its last return into fallow or another purpose needs to be dropped out of the budget. So every year there is a need to include the new paddocks and update the farm total, and the fallow paddock, things going into fallow, the values for the last return as far as fertiliser applied or the nutrients applied, N and P, need to be dropped off. So it's no small job to actually do that. Any questions so far, or any comments, observations?
No, all good.
Okay. So, the key components relate to the bits and pieces that are in the regulations. And, by and large, the reason I'm going through this is if you're going to be working in the sugar industry and in either selling fertiliser or assisting farmers work out what the nutrients are required, then the process will some way relate back to this, because soil tests that are taken for the future to be included in the budget will need to be done in a compliant soil sampling strategy. So there's a whole document about how that needs to happen. The next thing is adhering to the prescribed interpretation process. So largely that's made easy by the 6 Easy Steps nutrient calculator. It is a cross-industry accepted standard, minimum standard, that is embedded into just about everything, because it is the calculations that are done in there are those exact calculations that are called up by the regulations. The next part is the allocation of products where we need to add nutrients, the allocation of products. So there's 2 parts to recommendations going forward for the sugar industry, particularly again, is if you're going to get involved in the NP budget side of things, is there's regulatory compliance, and then there's just the on-farm logistics. Just because we're doing NP budgets doesn't mean the farmer, should have to put up with, if we've got different zones on the farm, a whole change to his logistics that makes it so hard to apply the fertilizer because he needs 5 products at 4 different rates. That's not going to fly from a logistics point of view. So, the challenge in all of this is to meet up the regulatory requirements and match a reasonable logistics exercise on farm to apply the fertilizer that reflect what's required in the N&P budget. Well, I think we will get used to doing this, and I'm sure that we will come up with software tools to be able to make this easier. But at this stage, it possibly is a good thing that we're doing this in a manual sort of way, so we understand the process that we need to follow. The next part's a compliant record keeping and reporting. Again, the regulations say that there are certain pieces of information that need to be kept with the annual budget for the basis of auditing. So auditing's already started in the industry on a fairly casual basis as in 2019, but I imagine it will be stepped up as so. An audit is really about a government person coming to the contacting the farm, indicating that they're going to have an audit and they should get their information together. And the whole idea is to show that the information on fertiliser purchased, particularly N&P tonnes purchased, match those from the soil test and the NP budget that was put in place. So the farm that the amount used doesn't exceed the cap that was set under the soil testing regime. So reporting really on the farm at this stage is fairly simple. It's really about just calculating the total amount of N&P that has been purchased in any one harvest year, and then keeping records of what was recommended that you should purchase, and being able to put those together. And then after the first year, then there's an annual review and an update, as I said. So that's the cycle of things. And I'll just go into a bit more detail about each of those components. So for those that want to wade through about the 19 pages of the document that guides the regulations, that's what it looks like if you haven't already seen it and been advised to read it. Method for soil sampling and analysis of sugarcane properties regulated under the Environmental Protection Act 1994. It isn't that particular document is not a legal jargony sort of document. It is a practical working document on how to go about collecting soil samples, but it really starts at the top and says, what's a farm? What can I, because remember, the budget relates to a farm, and if an enterprise has multiple farms, then we can put some farms together and manage it together under one NP budget. In some cases, if the farms are, particularly if they're in different districts, as you would see them in the 6 easy steps, the zones you can select, like the difference between Mackay and Proserpine and the Herbert and those sort of things. Then if you've got an enterprise that has farms in different climatic zones with different yield targets, then you have to have a separate NNP budget for each of those, even though it's part of the same enterprise. So, there is some terminology we've got to be careful here about what's an enterprise or under a trading name, and what is a farm that we can, or what's an area that might be multiple farms that we can treat together, and where do we need to separate them? In the first round of this whole project, data collection is probably up to 30% of the total job. Getting together the information that allows us to put together the NP budget and the interpretation is a fairly big job first time round, because really under the legislation, every area of paddock, every block on the farm or every sub area that is treated needs to be identified on a map. And that's the whole farm other than non-productive areas. So it's not just that's in cane. We've got to identify those areas that might be in fallow that are used in cane at some stage on the farm. So we've got to collect all that data and get it into one place where we can manage it. So we've got to identify, map all discrete production areas on the farm and somehow get the boundaries on a map. So we can use mill maps where we can get the cooperation of the mills to provide mill maps, remembering they're always a year in hindsight for the fertiliser. They're always a year behind. So, you know, really, where they need possibly when they're available only in April, May, they'll need to be tweaked at least for the crop class, updated 1 year, and and maybe the boundaries changed, or draw them, which I imagine, Tim, you've been through with Google Maps, how to draw boundaries, and I'll show you how we do it now, or we'll demonstrate how it's done in our system later on. One of the big things with it that we've got to know about in this is crop class, particularly for planting blocks, because for any harvest year, so for the 2022 harvest year, I imagine we'll start soil testing in January, February, March for that harvest year. And the fertiliser obviously responds to the harvest year, not the actual year that it's applied in. So everything needs to come back to the harvest year. The next step is to identify block grouping parameters to minimise the number of samples. Yeah, as I said, you know, farmers don't want to be sampling every block and sub-block on the farm and then figuring out how to group them together based on the soil test. The allowance under the regulations say that you can group them prior to based on good practice in understanding what causes the variables. Now, Tim's thrown us a banner in the works with that this morning, saying that you know, we would have thought that given those EM, were they EM maps or something else?
The ones that you put up before?
Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Okay, so you know, based on the EM map there, that it appeared that there may be soil types within that one paddock that may need to be tested or treated separately, but obviously, you know, as Tim said, the stacked NDVI images showed that there was really no difference. The cane seems to cut through that, even though you know, there were differences in you know, P levels and all of those sort of things. So, you know, the regulations, you know, the minimum standard is soil type. So recognising that soil types generally are different from each other because of some major change in a characteristic of the soil type. It may give it different characteristics from a productivity point of view or from a nutrient loss point of view. But many farmers would be able to point to paddocks in their farm, on their farm that map to have two different soil series in the one paddock that don't produce any different, just like we did with the EM map. So, you know, some degree of pragmatism comes into that as well, to say, okay, well, you know, I'm just going to treat it as these group of paddocks together, because we know that soil type and what we might see as soil constraints don't make any difference to the productivity of that area. One of the big ones that does define what will create a need to, I suppose, divide areas up is mill product use. And in all circumstances, whether they are over 100 tonne or not, all areas that have had mill byproduct need to be tested separately to the other major as a separate group. Even if it's a subgroup of a bigger group, because not all of that bigger group got milk byproduct. So that's going to be one that will be looked at fairly closely, I think, in any audit. That if there's any mill byproducts being purchased, that they are isolated on the maps, and separate samples are available to show how that's been taken care in the budget. Another one is, as you've seen, is major constraints. You know, these are the types of words that are used in the regulations, and they don't define what the constraint is. And no doubt there are areas, but I would think, again, pragmatically, to start with, there will be probably a focus on soil type and mill byproduct use as the major dividers of what constitutes a group or not. Sorry, I didn't get that. Can you repeat that, Tim?
You just froze there for a second. You're right now.
Oh, right. Was that a comment for me or just a comment that it was froze?
No, it's right now. There's no comment. So.
Okay, so once we've identified the next stage is for all plant and you know, in year one of establishing, one of the complications is that every block as of December 1, whether it was, even if it's in return this year, if it's in its fourth return, still needs to have a soil test attached to it. So we can either do that by you know, getting a previous sample that's been done a couple of years ago and saying, well, that's the best representation of this block I can find, and I interpret that. What does that block say it would require on the fourth return, and that becomes part of the NPP budget. Now that has to be done this year if it hasn't been done previously. So if there are blocks there that have not been sampled in the past 5 years, then they've got to be joined to a group and a NP budget allocation of nutrient applied to that this year, and then we can roll it forward next year. For those areas that haven't been sampled previously and are going to be planted this year, or maybe replant blocks after this summer, and you know, for whatever reason they might end up being replant blocks, then they will need to be sampled. Sometime in the you know, in the 12-month period prior, the regulations say 12 months prior, they've got to have a soil sample prior to actually applying fertilizer. So they will need to be sampled, and the lab results pinned to that, and the interpretation pinned to that block somehow. The last bit, and this one is important. Remember, we're dealing with reef regulations, and I don't think this one's probably going to crop up initially, but it could be a point of contention further down the line, is that under the reef regulations, there is a requirement to use labs that are so-called compliant laboratories. And I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail afterwards, what that means, because there is a potential, if we don't, and we're not aware of the capabilities of the laboratories, we might be using a test that's not compliant under the regulations. Therefore, the whole NP budget is not compliant because the soil sample wasn't. So under the reef regs, a compliant soil laboratory needs to be able to demonstrate that they can do those 5 tests and they have the required, I suppose, certification from ASPAC that they are able to do those tests to a certain standard. So organic carbon, which is the basis of the nitrogen recommendation, BSESP for acid, for soils and acid, for phosphorus and acid soils, peat buffer index for both BSESP to look at the absorption class, which adjusts the rates, and also for use in Colwell P, which it does the same thing in where the soils are above 7. And the pH 1 to 5 water if you're using Colwell P, because we've got where soils are above 7, you use Colwell P, not BSESP.
So is that, there was some discussion yesterday, is that actually in the legislation? Because everyone sort of recognised that yesterday. Is that accountable? Because what was the comment that some people were only going to believe BSES or something? Is that right? Well, I forgot what we talked about yesterday. About BSES.
Well, yeah, so in the vertical, we've got alkaline soils, we're using the Colwell.
Using Colwell, yep.
I think there needs to be a lot of work done with this Colwell comparison with BSES P.
Yep.
I think that needs a little bit more work in the future. But for a lot of the other areas that are on acid soils, that's fine. Just use BSES P.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
anything over 7, we have the option of using BSES or Colwell.
Righto. So yeah, so we are right. Yeah, anything over 7, we're using coal oil up here, and yeah, BSES. We're Jason's just saying we need a bit more work done on coal oil comparisons. That's sort of up your alley, but yeah, everyone's sort of obviously legislation's actually considering that, which is good.
Yeah, well, this is taken out of the latest version of what that's that. I just basically cut and pasted that in there. And yeah, Jason, I recognise there was work going on to try and calibrate it, but unfortunately, I imagine with Phil Moody's death that's probably gone a little bit on the back burner until they can figure out who's going to take that over and continue it on and do some more work. Okay, so what it really says is if if you're using a laboratory, you need to know that they have ASPAC certification, or certification for each of those methods. Otherwise, any information or any interpretation that's based on strictly to the law, anything that's based on an uncertified lab is not compliant. Now, I've underlined this one is required, so that ASPAC proficiency is required. Also, that it is recommended that laboratories can demonstrate their operations comply with AS 17025, which is basically a QA system or ISO system that NADA in Australia. Now, not all laboratories actually go to that level, but it does say it's recommended, and it's I think most of the laboratories, I think we deal with 7 or 8 laboratories that I know have QA systems in place that are possibly not externally audited, but probably come up to the standards that would meet those for external auditing. So it's a recommended, but that's a required. So if you want to know whether a lab actually measures up, there is a website which I'll show you in the next slide that you can go to. The other qualified compliance that comes across this area is FirCare Accredited Advisor, if you want to use that as an entrance to being able to provide your customers or with the growers with you the subsidy program for soil testing, is that the FAA standard is actually higher than the reflect legislation. And what it says, and if you want to maintain your FAA status, you've got to show that you're using a lab that meets 4 out of the 5 compulsory methods for ASPAC certification, not just those initial 4, and those being pH, nitrate nitrogen, extractable nitrogen, extractable phosphorus, extractable potassium, and extractable sulfur. And then there's a whole group of other ones that people can do, but they need to get 12 out of this total 16 for certification. And if you go on to this website, you can actually look up which lab and which ones it's actually certified for, because if it shows up in here, you can see acid P, which is BSESP. You can go over to this button over here and click on it, and it'll tell you a bit about the method and where, what it's related to. But you can quickly go from this site, go and have a look at a laboratory. One of the things that's important is to recognise is this is in hindsight. They can only give certification based on performance in the past. So if a lab is non-compliant, it may be a good thing to give them a quick ring and say, how are you going this year? Certifications given out in December each year. So if you get to July, August, and you say, oh, gee, this I want to use this lab, but they're not showing up in this list, you can ring them up and say, how have you gone in the rounds for this year? Have you been, because they do 3 rounds a year to test their compliance. If the 2 of the 3 have been done and they've been compliant in something that's missing, I'd say you're pretty right to go forward and use that lab. But It is an important thing. It relates, as I said, to the regulations and being compliant in that area. Now, I don't think anyone's going to get picked up in the short term, but things can get messy, and that can be a nitpicky thing that if it's not right, then it's got something could unravel from that point.
What's the
to cover off on?
What's the consequence of non-compliance?
At this stage, it's a discussion about how you would bring it into compliance.
Right. So it's not you won't be growing sugarcane anymore.
No, that's about level 5 elevation of DEFCON. No, in talking to the compliance officers with this whole thing that do the audits, it's about in most cases it's the soft touch, getting people to move forward to doing the right thing, and pointing out any deficiencies in what they're doing. It's not about it's not like a speeding fine. It's black and white. Any comments about labs?
No. All good.
Okay. Just a quick, again, an overview. Jack will go through the the live action on this, but the way that we've developed this bit of software, it's purpose built to integrate all the tools that are required to do everything in one place and interconnectivity. So collection of data, that's by district, block details, soil samples, preferred products, recent mill byproducts, all that sort of stuff can be collected and collated in the database. The calculations are automated internally, and you can set up templates for your favourite. So for your district, the district yield, and all of the variables that come with variable parameters that are operator variables that are in the 6 easy steps are selectable variables, as are the fertiliser products. So we can set them up as calculation templates and favourites. So for a plant cane, if you've got a particular district within your district that you, by and large, use the same product at a similar rate, you can set that up as a favourite, and then just instead of going finding products for planting and returning, you can come up with a program that you can just apply the whole program. For farm map creation in the system, we can import mill maps, and we are doing so from a range of the mills at the moment in our beta testing. Or you can use you can draw using inbuilt tools. In the case of mill maps, we can bring in block boundaries, areas, and block names. And for the future, we'll be able to bring in anything that's attached as another layer. So, even past yields, CCS, all of those things that come in the mill map data will be able to be imported and stored. But by and large, to create the NP budget and do the interpretation, then the block boundaries, area, and name and crop class will be probably the most important. At the moment, because the crop class from mill maps is aged, it's last year, we go through a manual step of assigning a crop class blocks to crop classes, and Jack will show you. We've got a tool to be able to do that, where you can just multi-click paddocks or blocks that have the same crop class and assign a crop class on a multi-block select. We need to map any anomalies. As I said, mill byproduct's probably going to be the big one, and there's an inbuilt tool to be able to map byproducts by product, by major rate, to be able to show them on the maps that go with your NP budget. There's the ability, once we've got blocks in there, the next thing is to do is the grouping based on mill byproducts, and as I said, largely at this stage, it's the soil series layer from Queensland Grove, which I believe you probably have had a look at. That's all built in. So you can actually see that as an underlay, as I'll show you, in helping you decide what a boundary might look like. Allocate your blocks to the groups that you've created. Select an interpretation template for the block, and then we allocate a template and parameters to a soil sample. So it really, you can actually, in the system, you can emanate or originate the soil samples through our system, or we do have a universal soil test in importer, which you can import at the moment automatically from 3 labs, past data or anything that's in a compliant format. And there's another way of doing it. So we can bring in data from basically from most of the labs that are involved in the soil. So you don't have to originate them here. You can bring them in from the past, or you can choose to sample outside our system and bring them in separately. So what we're going to do is test the new plant blocks by and large. As I said in the first round with farmers, we've got to create the 4th return maybe for 2022, the actual rates they're going to be used, and that may be importing a sample that was done previously 4 years ago and running that through the system to get the 4th return rates. Anyway, and there's so that's the sampling process. You can either order in the system or you can actually bring samples from elsewhere. So this is a look at the system. The maps have been brought in. I think, Jack, these ones have been brought in from Mill Maps, and you can see we've got the name, the crop class. They're a bit small, but and the area showing.
Yeah, they're from the mill.
Sorry?
Yeah, they are. They're straight from a mill.
Yep, okay. The next thing to do is I've turned on the soils layer underneath it. This is in the Mackay district, and you can see, a lot of the paddocks in this part of the farm all relate to the same soil series. So the only thing that we would possibly do different is if there was mill mud applied to any of these areas, we'd need to separate them off as a separate area of the same soil type. So you can see there's a St Helens soil group or soil series. These ones, by and large, are sitting on the Marion group, and we've got this paddock here that's a bit of a dog's breakfast, got a bit of everything. And the regulations would say we can make a choice as to which way we go. It's just the major soil group that we feel. We might say based, it may be that based on past records that we can prove that the yield across all of these hasn't been different. And then we just have to come up with a way of sampling these that gave us a realistic outcome as far as interpretation is concerned.
Chris, just a question on that one. So if we're assuming that those top blocks are all on the same soil type, and there was 3 plant blocks in that blue soil zone,
yes.
Are you suggesting that we only have to soil test 1 paddock and we can interpolate that onto the other 2 plant blocks?
That's correct. You are allowed to do that.
Yep. And when you said before that, we've got to get soil test for returns, if there's any returns in that, we've done a plant cone recommendation. We can just use that as a substitute.
Sorry, what's that?
So before you said, the regulations going forward, even if we've got a 4th return, we need to have a soil identifier for nutrition purposes.
Yes.
We could use the 1 soil test that we've done in that whole zone to attribute data to that 4th return that's also in that zone.
If you've done one, say 5 years ago in that paddock there, and this one's in a 4th return, and you don't have a soil test and it's the same group, yes, you could use the 4th return data from that paddock to populate the others in the group.
So could you populate that whole soil zone on 1 soil test that we're doing for planting next year?
In theory, yes.
Yeah.
But as I said, pragmatically, as an agronomist, are you doing the best thing by the farmer by doing that?
The other question, well, I've got.
So is there varietal differences why you would change and say something of that type?
The other question around the mill maps is.
You want to come up closer, Joe?
Can you hear me?
No.
Yes.
The other thing with the mill maps is that, you know, like in the verdict, if we're strictly Wilmar orientated, so is Blaine Creek and up in the Herbert, are you guys working with Wilmar to access the mill map layers of them to import into your software?
Jack, I'll leave that one to you.
Yeah, so we've imported from a number of users have been from Wilmar. We don't interface with the mills directly because it all has to, of course, involve the grower, and it has to be with their permission. So they're the ones that need to really be requesting the mill map, and whether that's through an agronomist or with you, you know, side by side with them. I know a few of them. I believe it could be Wilmar has a portal that the maps can be downloaded from, but the grower needs to actually log in with their credentials and then download those maps. So we don't have, you know, an API relationship or any kind of auto import. We're not ingesting all of the mill maps by default. They do need to be sourced by yourselves or the grower and yourself through the grower, and then they can be imported into our system. It's really the what I believe is the Privacy Act and the like. So we're not looking to automate that because there still just needs to be that level of intervention from between the mill and then the grower.
Yeah, that's good because there's quite a bit of discussion around whether growers actually have the permissions to use the mill data because the mill data actually collected that data. So there's still a bit of toing and froing on whether a grower can provide Wilmar data to a third party. I was just interested on how that's progressing, but it sounds like you got through it, which is great.
Yeah, I've certainly. I just yesterday was chatting with someone, and they were having real issues getting the mill maps, but we've had enough now, enough sort of supplied, and hopefully that'll be enough, you know, traction and momentum to sort of, I guess, get the ball rolling for everyone. I mean, otherwise, even the farm that we're looking at, it's not really, you know, it's far from the largest. So to manually draw some of these properties would just be a massive undertaking.
Absolutely.
And I guess the point is that anyone can put up roadblocks if they don't want something to happen.
Yeah.
But in reality, if the industry wants this to happen, then that sort of issue needs to disappear.
Yeah, and I think it will. I mean, this is for everyone, you know, to everyone's benefit. Well, it's not providing it, not having this kind of cooperation is to the detriment of everyone in the end.
I think the main reason why they're a little bit reluctant is because they accept the fact that they're not all accurate. And if we're doing NMP plans based on inaccurate polygons, we're going to be in a world of hurt.
So it's a blame. Yeah, who do we blame if something goes wrong?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, that's why we see this as a collaborative platform, and possibly after the mill maps are imported in any 1 year, then it will be the grower's responsibility to adjust the boundaries, the crop class, and those types of things. So we can change the level of access so they have access to the mapping layers and mapping tools to update that sort of thing, but they can't get into the area maybe that the agronomist is formulating other things. So there's levels of permissions. Part of the thing with the mills, I think they were worried about getting inundated with requests into their IT department, and they'd be having trouble coping. And secondly, we've had to go through quite considerable discussions with some of their IT departments around terminology and just some of the way the data is exported to make it relevant to this situation.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's one series underlay. The system's got the capability of bringing in and basically a range of layers to lay in there and use as background to forming groups. So I didn't do it, but I could have brought in the EM layer and laid it in there as well over the paddock for the one that you were looking at. So, you know, it's a viewer, it's not a creator. We're not into precision ag. We are users of precision ag, but not necessarily creators. So, you know, we've created a system that allows the import and viewing as a layer to help make decisions around what we might group together and what we might not. As I said, we have tools there to divide, and Jack will probably show you, draw a mill map, byproduct application areas, or we can actually define constraints if we want to, and they are defined. They're not comments, constraints. They will stay in the database, and we can record them. But they don't have to be displayed for compliance point of view. So you can draw them just for the hell of it for your information, but not necessarily have to report them, or report them as part of a group. Once we do that, we add barcodes, and this is just a display of work pending. These samples are back and ready for processing, and these are the other ones that are outstanding. As I said, that's one way of doing it. The other one is bringing samples in, and you can see these are the red dots are the representation of where the samples have been taken, or and in some cases where you've grouped them, it might be a centroid of an area that's been grouped. Okay, so that's the soil testing side. Excuse me. The interpretation, we've got the sample back from a compliant lab. Now we're guided by this document, which is a method for calculating the optimum amount. And it's basically a minimum requirement. And it's only focused on N and P, and we know that we've got to deal with amendments. We've got to deal with KS and trace elements, and possibly magnesium and calcium, and silicon. So, you know, it's only one focus. The system actually does use the full calculator, not just the N and P. And as I said, we've built in basically the original nutrient calculator that has some of the extras built in, like horticulture. If people want to go past the minimum and come out of horticulture and account for the soil mineral nitrogen, they want to do the legume approach and possibly reduce rates a little bit for legumes. Those sorts of things are already built in and selectable in your templates. The one that's sort of is probably you've got to really be careful of, and it was great fun to try and build this in as an automated process, but the anomalies in the regulation that allow certain things to happen under unusual circumstances. So, using the return rate in plough out replant rather than the plant rate. Nil fertilizer at planting in the planting year, and how that needs to be adjusted in the actual rates. Using the minimum P where 0 is recommended, or P up front, and then how do we account for that in the returns where we used all in the planting year? Those things can catch you out, and they're questions we really need to understand when you're talking to growers about what's their plan around that, because they can be gaps, and if you forget that all the P's gone up front and the system generates, also puts it in the return and can blow the P budget out quite nastily. The last part of this is we get caught up in paddocks and groups, but really, in the end, the reef N&P budget is about a whole farm budget. It's about a maximum amount according to each of the blocks and groups that have been interpreted under the 6 easy steps, is the maximum amount in tonnes of N or P you can put on that farm. And that's set by the soil test. And it's an accumulation of obviously plant and returns that are in the ground, and of course nothing's been applied to fallow, so it's an accumulation. And what it's called is a cap and trade system. So the 6 easy steps says that you might put on 120 kilograms of N, 10 of P and 80 of K. There's nothing wrong with putting on 150 kilograms on that paddock as long as you take it off another one. And the actual whole farm budget stays under the required number of tonnes. So it's a cap and trade. So, you know, you can move nutrient, particularly N and P, around within the farm and reallocate it in a particular year. You can't do it across years. You've got to do it within a year. You can move it between blocks and over or increase the rate in some and decrease the rate in others, as long as you end up with the same total. So, you know, the thing that we're trying to do when we're getting to this interpretation stage, we come up with a nutrient plan, then we're going to convert it into a fertilizer plan. So the nutrients satisfies the compliance, but the actual fertilizer plan has to satisfy the farm logistics. So it's got to be practical to implement. Minimise the number of products and rates, ensure other nutrients and amendments are adequate. Remembering that N and P are the main focus, and that may compromise on some other nutrients because either there aren't products or there aren't product blend ratios that will exactly fit. When we're making a recommendation, particularly again, if you're going to stick to FAA accreditation as your way of compliance with being a qualified and appropriate person, then we've got to stick to make sure recommendations follow the 4 R's: product, rate, timing, placement. And then each year we've got to tweak the farm total under the cap and we can tweak it under the cap and trade process to make sure we end up being compliant in total. So once again, this is going back a quick look at the system we've built. Once the samples are back, you can actually view the actual raw data by clicking on the data point and looking at it that way under the analysis tab. You can look at the paddocks that particular sample relate to. So if you click on that one, Jack will show you all the paddocks come up into another pop-up box. And the rates that have been recommended for that group come up, and you can see plant rate through to return rates. This is basically allowing you to put your eye across it, because you're going to be the person that probably knows what you configured it for and what you're expecting as far as the rates and the discounts or the allowances for different circumstances and what might have come up. So under this system, what you can see up here is the whole farm budget as it stands. So as you go through each group, it updates the amount of N applied versus the amount that should be applied to date or could be applied to date as according to the 6 easy steps for N and P. So it just keeps updating and showing you when you're getting close. If you've changed the rates around a little bit and gone a bit higher, it allows you to readjust it, come back and readjust it, so you stay compliant while you're mucking around with the rates of product. When you add a product, a rate, timing, you can do that by a template, or you can create a custom blend, it'll show when I start applying products here, it'll accumulate them in the recommended versus what's required. You can see I haven't got the products in here, but this one's showing that I've probably gone over in N, and I'm under in P, and I'm under in K, and under in S. So we're going to choose to do something about that in the plant cane. And of course, it's showing where are we up to in the cumulative total for the farm based on the groups or paddocks we've tested. And of course, for each group that we've tested, we can put in some products. Some comments that will go into the report that guide the farmer and maybe guide if an auditor comes looking why we've gone over in this paddock and and an indication we've gone under in another one. So it's guidance notes and any notes that we want to make that might be relevant to why this is different or any other recommendations we might want to make. Any question about the calculator? It's fairly, it does There's a bit of setup stuff that Jack will show you about how you define the harvest year and what happens in the meantime if something changes and you need to go to replant rather than return one. All of those things that do happen, it does accommodate. And return 5+, you get this quandary of just how far out do you take it. I did hear about 22 years in one case. That's been one plant cane and 21 returns so far, which makes you scratch your head. But anyway, obviously that's an outlier we're not going to cater for, but we've gone 5+ as a reporting, an initial reporting period. Any comments? Any questions?
Yeah, I have one. So you're saying that to develop our maximum budget for the years, the 16 steps based on the soil test information.
Yes.
And that gives us our maximum, and we can tweak things underneath it to make sure that we're underneath that. What happens, is there any flexibility for the agronomist to manipulate the maximums outside of the 16 steps?
Only on the basis that you can, on the basis of achievable yield. And you need, you probably know better than I do, is it records of 3 of the last 10 years where you can demonstrate that a yield in excess of the district average has been achieved?
Where I'm getting to, Chris, is in the 16 steps guidelines for the vertical. For some reason, in the 16 steps, the replant rate of phosphorus is half that of the plant rate of phosphorus, and I don't understand why this is. So, understanding that that might be a bit of a abnormality, do we have the ability to push the replant P rate up to where the P rate should be?
I wasn't aware of that.
No, you don't. No, you can't. You can only do it on the basis of yield, which only really affects your nitrogen. It doesn't affect phosphorus. So your options are go to 150 or 180 as far as your yield in the Burdekin. And that really only affects the nitrogen, the phosphorus. But look, I can take that on board and talk to the guys at DES as to why that is in place and is it a mistake or and what's the purpose?
Yep.
If we've taken multiple soil samples in the one paddock, are we able to, on a better word, cherry pick both soil samples to get the highest nutrient application? Like, can we use both of them to provide a recommendation, or can we only select one?
So the question was, did you hear that? If we take multiple soil tests in the one paddock, can we cherry pick the results to get the optimal rate for the grower? Is that it?
If you choose a barcode to represent the group, but if you've chosen to sample multiples and want to take the one that's lowest that gives you the biggest rates, no one's to know that.
Yeah, but can you take like phosphorus from one test, like organic carbon from another?
Can you take phosphorus from one test and organic carbon from another?
No, they have to be from the same test.
Have to be from the same test, right?
So Chris, if we go back to that EC map, we've identified 2 soil zones in that paddock.
Yes.
The red zone says that we can put on, like 200 units of nitrogen. The blue zone says we can put on 180.
Yes.
I can't change my nitrogen rate on the run because I've got a blend in the fertiliser box. I don't have 4 bins on it. Where is the practicality of applying 2 different zones within a paddock? So in my mind, I am not going to limit one area above the other. So I will choose the 200 for that paddock.
Yeah.
Likewise, if one zone has 0P and one zone has 20P, I can't pick out P granules and place it in another place paddock. So I'm going to apply 20 across that paddock so I don't limit.
You don't limit your upside.
And that's the pragmatism, and that's completely allowable as long as you base it on, but you can't base it on 2 different tests. So you got to pick one or the other because what the legislation says is that for any one paddock or group of paddocks, it has to be based on a single test.
Yeah, I question that because we've had discussions with Des and Dom, and I think even in their manual, they've got a block there which is half of one soil type and half of the other.
Yep.
And they're suggesting that if you've got the 2 soil tests and you've got a line of evidence that you can only apply one blend at one rate, then that is practical and passes the top test.
Oh yeah, well, if you want to separate them and treat them separately, you know, blocks don't exist really within the system. There's groups of areas of soil that we group together, and there are those that are separate. If you choose to separate them, but they have a soil test that relate to each, then you can, you can do that. But you can't cherry pick, do 2 soil samples and take one. You've got to separate the areas and treat them separately, or you've got to pick one sample to represent the whole area.
Probably not. Well, I guess that's the letter of the law, and it makes sense why. But practically, what you're saying is,
Well,
you don't want to live.
I'm the understanding I can use 2 soil tests, 1 paddock, and ensure that that paddock does not get a non-limiting.
What about if you averaged them?
No, it's got to be based on a direct relationship between a soil test barcode,
Yep,
and a discrete area.
So when we do the recommendation for that block, Chris, and maybe this is where the communication error is. When we're doing the recommendation for the block, we've got a polygon, we've got 2 soil samples, and it says that block's nutrient is determined by barcode 2216459 and 2256143.
Yes. Well, it's not the block. It's, you know, what it is in our system and in the way that the sampling guidelines go, is they are separate groups.
so they should be treated separately.
They should be treated separately, yeah.
Well,
How are you going to treat one block separately? Like within block?
well, if you
So I mean, like, you know, if I've got one half of the block that requires 200 and one half, and the other half requires 180p,
and you've got one
the
blend,
200 N requires, like, you know, 0p, but the 180 requires 20p. How am I practically going to do this using one blend?
well, you can't do it with one blend.
Can't do it with one blend.
Simple as that. But in Broadacre, you'd run different products and you'd control each product differently. That's,
Yeah, right.
but not in a blend, not in a blend scenario. So what we need is a granular selector that pulls out the granules as it goes down the
Colour
tube.
sort.
A colour sorter. That's what we need. So
Look, the thing is, they're not going to worry about 0.5 of a hectare. You know, it's about the total farm. It's not about each paddock. And you know, the thing that they say is that they don't want productivity to be significantly impacted to the extent where, you know, growers, but you know, and with the unders and overs. So you might be able to save some, or you've just got to go, if you really want to stick to it, take 2 soil tests, and pick whichever one's most suitable.
That's the key to it. It's just being underneath that maximum farm budget.
It is.
yeah. Cool.
So to make matters worse, if we're just looking at the maximum budget for NMP across the whole farm, and the soil test says I can put on a maximum of 20p, can I put 50 on it? That block, as long as for the whole farm I'm under, and I can cherry pick that off and I'll return?
That question was asked at something I was at, and they said you can put all of the fertilizer on one paddock, but you can't put any on any others.
The sort of questions why we're so rigid on soil testing plant blocks when all we're going to do is worry about the whole farm.
Yeah.
Well, the rest of the farm, in the initial setup, has to be, particularly this year, if you don't have a soil test for a return 4 block as of the December 21, you've got to go and find one off the farm that you can associate with that particular paddock, and then run it forward as to what would be put on in the return.
Yeah.
That's got to be part of the budget.
I'm just got a quick question. I don't know if that's what we're just describing or discussing, but I just would like it with context wrong. But if runoff of nutrients is your biggest or our biggest concern, wouldn't allowing all of your fertilizer to be put onto one paddock not be moving towards that goal of limiting runoff of nutrients?
It was a flippant throwaway comment if you really wanted to interpret it that way, but from a productivity point of view, it'd be nonsense. But if you took it to the legislation, it's a whole farm budget, and that being the case, you can put them on area.
The whole idea of the 60 steps is that it's limiting runoff. So if all of a sudden we're suggesting that we can go over that 60 steps, are we not? So even if it's 10 kilos more phosphorus than what's recommended, even if it's 10 kilos more or 20 kilos more nitrogen, is that not moving towards an area that is not sanctioned by the 60 steps?
The theory is that if you put 20 kilos more nitrogen or 20 kilos more phosphorus, you've got to take.
You got to take it from somewhere else.
Yes, but when this is the issue though, because that's okay as a whole farm plan, but if they've worked out that the plant will only use 200 kilos of nitrogen based on your soil sample, does not putting 220 mean that according to the 60 steps, you will be leaching 20 kilos of nitrogen, and therefore it's not following their recommendations?
Yeah, no, I understand where you're coming from. We wouldn't be recommending to apply higher than the rate unless we had justification. So it's a highly productive block.
Yeah.
And we're going to take it from this block over here that's not highly productive, it's not going to miss the extra 20 kilos. So as long as the plant can extract that nitrogen, you're minimising your loss.
Yeah.
You wouldn't be putting a huge amount on a poorly productive area.
Yeah,
that's when
I get that. I agree with energy budgets. I think it's like easier. And I do think that it allows for more flexibility. But I do think that there is a contradiction between, the last how many years we've been bashing growers over the head with, you need to follow 6 easy steps, you need to do this, because if you put any more, like if growers put 2 kilos more than what was recommended, then they're getting looked at. But all of a sudden we're saying, oh, but actually you can just put as much nitrogen on this paddock as long as you take it away from your other ones.
And like, this is the problem with dealing with one size fits all recipes, such as the 60 steps of Vertical.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't take into account variety, such, so that we plant 240, we've got too much juice on it, it's going to lodge, fall over, and you get depleted CCS. I would rather reduce the 240 by 10 kilos or 20 kilos and put it on that 183 that loves nitrogen and can improve that. So there's a whole system of variables that we have to deal with that unfortunately isn't captured by the 60 steps, which was basically a guideline 10 years ago. It wasn't meant to be, like in law. But yeah, I think from an agronomy point of view, it really opens the opportunity to understand productivity, know where we can put extra, as long as we get a bang for our buck, and we're not losing it.
No, I agree. I think MPs do make things a lot easier. It just seems like such a contradiction.
That's why we built in this basically accumulator, so you can see where you're up to, and you can come back and adjust, keep adjusting things, in the products you apply, to see that the rates are a bit over the required, and maybe that might be done on the basis of variety for that group of blocks, and maybe you're right, Jason. In the long term, one of the things that will be a grouping element will be variety.
Yeah, no, absolutely. They're so important.
Yeah, And that's something again can come in from the mills. You know, I suppose hopefully that's accurate enough that they know what they're harvesting as far as varieties. But someone's going to have to run their eye over it in data, in that sort of automatic data import. It can be a bit dodgy. So the next step is records and budget. And there's a whole, and this one does get down to being environmentally relevant activity, which sugarcane cultivation in the reef catchment is. And it's got a whole 19 pages of this sort of doctrine that's come out from the department about what has to be done and what doesn't. But it's certainly this is the place where compliant reporting and what the budget report should have in place, so that when the auditors come knocking, that they can do the job fairly quickly. Now, in talking to them, the first thing they're going to look at is, okay, what did you apply, and is it within the farm totals? Initially, that's really they're going to be their focus, and that there is a system in place to have a report that shows all the blocks, which are the plant blocks, and that they've all got soil tests. It's sort of light touch to begin with, and then escalation where people are sort of trying to throw the traces. So that's what's guiding what has to go in the report, and what the definitions of things are, if you want to get hold of that document and read through it. But as it's 19 pages of bureaucratic jargon, of definitions and references between different sections. One of the things that we've got to I suppose recognise that what is a recommendation. From a legalistic point of view, a recommendation is anything from a formal report, a short report, and even to a phone conversation where you as a professional provide information that someone could use and apply to their situation, whether it works or it doesn't. So, a recommendation isn't necessarily what you write down. It can be a phone conversation, it can be found in the court as to being directing a farmer as a professional to do something.
Even so, a conversation at a pub on a Friday night after you've had 3 beers saying, yeah, I'd go and throw a bit of that out in that paddock. Is that classified as a recommendation, you think?
Yes. If you are a professional and recognised as a professional and have qualifications and knowledge in the area, and the person that you are speaking to is a judge to have lesser knowledge, then it's a recommendation.
Just keep that in mind. Hey?
Just verbally.
Verbally? Yep.
Yes.
So what you've got to do is keep that in mind as you go forward as professionals, that anything you say that is above what someone else's knowledge is classified as a recommendation. So
sorry, but then there should be a paper trail.
No. There should be a paper trail.
So then,
but
to say that I just go, oh no, but I didn't say that, or like, oh wait, some dude down the corner. Like,
then it's your word against theirs, and that gets really messy. But just keep in mind that just because it's Friday night after hours and you're at the pub and you've said something, that is still classified as a recommendation as a professional. So it's just a key thing you should take going forward, that be very careful about how you provide information to people. Because Chris said very quickly before, I don't know if you get on this, we're running out of time, but I'll just quickly run over product rate time and placement. Are you going to cover that anymore? Or do I just spend 2 seconds on it now?
Yeah, no, I wasn't going to get it. Well, I was going to in the way that the reports are set up, but is there something in particular you wanted to bring out, Tim?
I guess just thinking about, particularly around product recommendations, any of you are going to move into that space of doing that now, that if you just give someone a product recommendation and it's classified as just put urea on that paddock, if you don't consider the rate, timing, and placement, that's what will come back and bite you every time, because that is an incomplete recommendation. So if a guy goes and puts urea on and let me say, puts it on in the wrong time and burns the crop and dies, you're responsible because you have not provided a full recommendation. If that makes sense. So if you apply a chemical, you say you should go and put random on that paddock, and I've seen this happen before. Actually, DAF got into a lot of trouble a few years ago. They had a call centre and they thought it was a really good idea to give people recommendations. They said you should go and put Roundup on that paddock. They didn't tell them how to apply it, what rate, and it turns out it was a crop they applied to. Right? So they had no idea of the context. But if you don't, even things like nozzle selection is actually part of the recommendation for chemicals. So if you're not providing that full, how you apply something, the timing, the rate, it's no good applying just telling the product because you're giving 1/4 of the recommendation. So it's just something you should keep in mind as we go forward as professionals. What's going to happen if someone misinterprets the way that this is presented to me? And I think even you guys in, like, say a reef catchment's point of view or pasture's point of view, again, keep in mind the same kind of things. If I recommend something, where's all the likely holes that someone might misrepresent what I've said, and how might that come back to bite us? Yep. You can imagine how quickly that could go wrong if it was taken out of context. So just keep those kind of things in mind, and documenting is obviously the key point. I was shocked when I gave a presentation I was in Townsville about 2 years ago, and we said, put up your hand. This is a room full of agronomists. I said, put up your hand if you're providing written recommendations. Only about half the room put up their hand. So even half the agros up here are only providing written recommendations because they're worried they're going to get in trouble.
Yeah.
It's like you're going to get into way more trouble if you don't write it down, like 100 times more trouble, because the guy will say, no, you told me 100 units. And I said, I only told you 80. So who's right, who's wrong? You're going to be in trouble because you're the professional above the advisee, if you like. So written stuff is going to be fundamentally important. Documentation, I guess that's what BackPaddock is actually built on in the first instance, was providing recs, just like AgWell was providing recs. BackPaddock, its whole life is built on recommendations, record keeping, for that reason. Sorry, mate, we are running out of time, but anyway,
just a quick one on that, and the most innocent thing, and the one that I see most in auditing recommendations from North Queensland, is the use of non-standard units, bags per acre, and that sort of thing. If I can tell you in a court of law that if that's the only reference you've got and something goes wrong, you're in a world of hurt. If you haven't put in brackets kilograms per hectare, in other words, the units of trade in the country that we live. And I'll give you a reason why. What size bags do fertiliser come in?
They used to come in 50, now they're 40.
So it was 50, now 40, some 25.
1 tonne, 1.2 tonne. I had a situation that didn't come to a legal problem, but where a backpacker was working, and he was an ag science graduate, had a master's on a cotton farm at Emerald, and the farmer said, "Look, we've got to put some pre-plant background fertiliser on the cotton blocks. Look, there's an 8-tonne trailer there with 8 bags on it. Can you go and put that out of a bag to the acre on that block?" And the bloke came back a couple of hours later and says, "I'm finished." And he said, "That should have taken all day." And he said, "Well, what did you do?" And he said, "Well, I got the bags, I calibrated the planter with the bags, and I put out 8 bags. 8 1-tonne bags per, about 1 tonne bag per acre." Who's wrong?
Yeah.
That actually did have consequences because they couldn't grow cotton in there for 2 years. There was just too much fertiliser in the beds. Try as they might, they just couldn't get a good establishment, as you could expect. But it is very common for units to get mixed up. And in a court of law, if you haven't used the units of trade for the area that you're in some way, shape or form, there's nothing wrong with saying bags per acre if the farmer understands what you mean, but it is good insurance to write kilograms per hectare in there in brackets to cover your ass in case it goes wrong.
Well, a good example, say, putting on 100 kilos of N. right? Most farmers would think that's 100 kilos of urea, but urea is only how much percent nitrogen?
46.
Right? So you're recommending on 100 units of nitrogen when he's thinking 100 kilos of urea, right? Half the rate. So that's the kind of things that can come really quickly, because as an agronomist, you're thinking about product amount, not on the application method or the type of product you're applying. So that's why communicating is really important and documenting is really important. Thanks, mate.
Okay, quickly, just to the reports. You know, that's an example of a compliance report. So it's farm, crop class, soil group, or just group. It doesn't have to be soil group, but it's group data. What the soil test data is, which blocks are allocated to that group, whether it's had byproduct and any of the products, and what the 6 easy steps is recommended, and what I've put into the products and rates, and the tons, the compliance as far as that group goes. So in this case, it said we could put on 4.3 tons of nitrogen, and we've only put on 3.9, and so on until we get down to you know, as it shows here, I can over. This one says it's a return block, third return. Decided to put some more in on there. It's been really productive and a vigorous variety. But in total for the whole farm, I'm still under, because I've gone under a little bit on these areas, and for whatever reason, I've gone over there. So, you know, it just shows when an auditor comes along, they've got a quick look at, okay, what are the plant blocks, which groups they allocated, and they'll have a map there of the groups and where they lie and which paddocks lie within them to confirm that. They've got soil test data, and then, you know, that you can print out the soil test bar data for the different groups. And then from a logistics point of view, here's the products that you require. So you're at planting, you're going to need this much 55 and this ECN. For your return crops, you've got these tons. So it's really a purchase list and approximately when you're going to do it, or you can go into more detail of looking at you know, the timing where we've split it. So we've got the planting 2 products, just what the different rates are and the number of kilograms that are going to tons are going to be required. So these are really for the farmer to be able to tick off and say, yeah, I've done that, I've done that, I've done that. Either this can be represented on a map or it can be done in grid. So the idea is to provide both out of the one system, a compliance map, a compliance report, and also a logistics report for them to tick off or write in you know, what they actually did. As I said, as far as recording goes, if they just tick these off, I believe as far as the compliance officer is the case, this type of recording is enough, but there is the opportunity to record electronically as well. Block by block as you fertilise, obviously, which product you used and what rate, in a separate app that's under development. So, you know, there's a whole heap of reason why the purpose-built system, you know, is what it's about trying to make this easy and efficient, because trying to do it in bits and pieces is enough trouble. But this one is where problems are really going to occur. If people are doing this manually in Excel, then Excel hell will take place as you roll it over for next year. As you bring in new plant cane and take out fallow ones, unless you're really good at Excel and know where your links lead and how to relink them, any linkage between paddocks is going to be an absolute nightmare. So that's why we decided to build a purpose-built system that has mapping, soil sampling, interpretation, product selection, and compliance and farm logistics reporting all built in to make it really efficient and roll over. Because what it does is actually on the each year it will roll over and update your crop classes and all those sort of things, as long as you and then you can start adjusting from there.
Well, one of the challenges we've got up here, Chris, is that growers change block numbers quite often. So, you know, like block 11-1 was not block 11-1 3 years ago. And recording everything in Excel, you're opening you up to a lot of loss of information. And
Yes.
it's really important, like you guys do, to have this spatially allocated, because that piece of earth is always that piece of earth.
That's right, yes. Okay, Jack, over to you for whatever time's left.
Beauty.
I'll stop sharing. Jack's going to give you just a quick look, a live look, and probably point out some of the import features.
Yeah, so I'll blitz through it pretty quickly. So what we've got, what we're looking at, what we'll be looking at is still sort of our beta version. So we've got another release coming in January. So this is where we land, and then we'll go straight into setting up what we call the model templates. And this is the reason I'm starting with this is because as a user, these are attached to your username to be able to deploy wherever makes sense. So this is where we look at the full 6 easy steps calculator. So what we can do here is giving the template a name, which is anything relevant. So typically that would be district. So by selecting a district, and then we get a yield potential, which can be adjusted. But as we've spoken about, that could more and likely would require justification. We've got our overrides here to be able to select
zoom, Jack, can you just hit Control plus or something just to zoom up a little bit?
And any better?
Maybe one more. Yeah. Sorry, I'm blind.
Yep, that's better.
That's all right. Okay, so this is all our detail for our templates. So as I said, setting up these overrides for those anomalies that Chris spoke about, yield potential here, and then this is where we attribute any mill byproduct. And so that is applied to the template and will then be considered in any calculations for nutrient rate and the like. Chris also alluded to these extra end credits, and then there's also irrigation where it is relevant for those regions. So that's really the model templates. As I said, that's something that you set up once, and then you can have as many or as few, and then be deploying those across multiple clients, many farms. Okay, so we'll jump across into the map. So I might just have to zoom this one out a shade. Alrighty, so what we've got here, we've obviously got a boundary map that I've already imported. So really, as part of the process when you're establishing all that data collection phase that we spoke about. So part of that is, of course, getting a mill map file or drawing them. Chris talked about we have the ability to upload or ingest tests from a number of labs. So that would all be kind of happening concurrently with this. Then it comes to actually importing this map file. So I'll just preview that. So I've just selected a file here, and then what we get is we've got the attributes that are held within that mill file, and then it's just a matter of mapping them. So selecting name, and then that will populate name in our database. And then we can either select individual, and you can see that it's highlighting there. And behind, we can individually import certain boundaries, or we can import all of them. And then that will create in our database and set all of that up. And then we can go through and start configuring that farm. So I won't import that now because I've already got one there. So we've imported our boundaries. Chris talked about being able to map constraints and also mill byproduct. So what we can do here, we can choose our application date and then also the rate, and then also a constraint. So we've got other subsoil, and then what we can do is just draw where any of those constraint areas may be. So say if you know that I've already drawn a couple here, I would say if this area here looks a bit, there's an area of concern. As Chris said, this isn't something that's required by legislation, but it's really part of this formative process of getting a clear picture of what's happening on farm so that you can make better decisions. Okay, so we've got our constraint layers. I'm just going to toggle that layer off. Then we've also got our sample points, so we can view our sample points on map. I talked about being able to import those from labs. If you want to see them on map and then be able to view these, there is, of course, a process ensuring that the samples you upload are matched to the names of the blocks, because otherwise they won't know where to go effectively. We can click through and see the underlying test data there of each result, and we can also view the analyte status. Then we can see here on these points and just select which analyte we'd like to see. Again, this is really just can be part of your process, and then we can also drop a pin on the map to request a sample, and then that flows through to a mobile app for collection. Alrighty. So then, if we've got all of the information that we need, we know that we've got those samples, they've been taken, we've got our boundaries, then we can look at our soil layer. So here we've obviously, we can render this layer on the side. We've got a transparency control. If we want to see the underlying satellite image, we also have the ability to just view either road, or you can change this to none if you want to have just a more opaque. So we've established where the soil groups exist on farm. We know where we have soil tests, and then we can look at actually creating some groups. So if I knew that I had there was that one dominant soil type up the top here, so I just holding shift and selecting, and then I've just opened up a grouping process. So this was Helen's plant. You can select a barcode, an evaluation, depending on whereabouts you are, and then a description, which is really for your own purposes, just to help identify these groups. Harvest year is really just allocating a specific calendar year to the crop class or cycle, and then that really drives the reporting. So where if you're rendering a 2022 report, then this group will be allocated to 2022, and then rolling forward, of course, the returns into the subsequent years. So we've got here, and then our model template selection. And so as I showed you earlier, now we can just select which template we want to use, and then that will actually run the process. We can actually see and just drill into a bit of detail and show any other data that was here. It's really just a preview. I can save that group, get a confirmation there, and then I'd go through and can look at doing more of those groupings. If I was looking to do that, I've already created a few just so that we don't have to step through the whole process. Just jump back into that group. And then we showed it before, that this analysis, which is just the underlying test data. Again, really just for your reference. And then jumping across to rates. And then now we can actually populate our product plan. And so, yeah, we've got our required and then our recommended as we add products, which is, I didn't even have a look at what we needed, but anyway, we'll deal with K first, and that'll be, this is the part where you work out that I'm not an agronomist.
200.
Or apparently a mathematician. Not banded. Anyway, so then I hit enter, and then this will actually calculate live like that. And then so we go through, add products as we need to actually meet, or, you know, as we talked about, that bit of a cap and trade process. We talked about that output, which is, again, the output of the model and the interpretation that's been run. And again, really for you and your reference. So we can save that. We've also got a nifty sort of feature which falls into really more of the logistics planning, which is being able to view a custom layer, as we call them, or actually highlight on map which products have been recommended in which blocks. So say if I wanted to create a map for planting, so I'm just selected a fertilizer here, adding another product, and then we can give them a color. We can give them a pattern if we'd like, and then we can apply those and actually show a map of where they're required, and then that can be exported with a legend showing the product rate timing. You know, that discussion before about as far as covering bases and compliance, it's critically important. So these are more so for the grower rather than for the auditor, but there's a number of other queries here that can be added that could be used to, well, I guess, as part of the reporting process and compliance process. You know, we can add sugarcane groups to this query and be able to identify all of your groups sort of on one image with your soil series layer underneath and your barcode points rendered there as well. So that's our process for that. And then we can obviously create a report. This report won't look as pretty as the final product that Chris showed you before. So I mentioned this is on our beta. So this will run, and then this is collating all of that information and then displaying it as one report. So we get our recommended and 6 easy steps totals, and then also flowing down into our soil sample summary, and then our logistics reports, which, yeah, as we see as being quite valuable just for purchasing and the like. And that's pretty much it. So obviously there's, you know, there would be more than one group on farm, but we tried to streamline it all and recognize that a lot of the process is in gathering that information up front. But once you've got that done, and certainly obviously moving forward in future years, we can be revisiting these plans and tweaking any products. And then also one thing I didn't show you is just being able to actually edit boundaries and drawings. So we have a suite of drawing tools here, merging, splitting paddocks, editing boundaries, and doing creating a new boundary from scratch.
Is the NDVI feature working on at the moment, mate?
On the smaller boundaries, no, we've still got to tackle that one, Tim. But yes, we have a partnership with Tim, and so we have an API where we ingest feeds from them, which we're constantly looking and very keen on. Well, both of us are very keen on exploring that and building that out even more.
Mate, I must say I haven't seen what you've done for a while with this, but I'm blown away how much progress you've made in the whole complete package there. That's incredible. I think, yeah, amazing job to put all that whole process into one box and take care of the whole bloody lot, because as we know, the compliance requirements of agriculture is only going to increase, it's not going to go backwards. So I think we've got to make this as easy as possible for everyone involved in the process, because someone's got to pay ultimately. And to make it easy for agronomists and growers to do is critically important.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, Tim. And yeah, as I said, come January, I mean, this is our working site now, but the release is well on track for January, where it's significant improvements just to the user interface, really. But a lot of through the testing was my big focus was trying to work out where the pain points were in the future, and then trying to make it so that it was as easy as possible, and talking about that Excel hell and all of the things that you've got to think about, that as humans, we're not really programmed to necessarily think that way. So get the machines to do it for us, the machines, or, you know, Dr. Dirt. So. Yep.
automate Chris. Yeah.
Yeah. That's what we're working on.
I mean, it's also, as a general, just an overall thing too, Optera is covering livestock, cropping, and this kind of compliance thing. So there is a livestock component, feed budgeting and mob movements and stuff. So trying to build a more complete package for those farmers that do have either mixed farming, complete cattle, complete crop sort of scenarios to cover all bases. So I just thought I'd mention that right at the end too.
Any questions at all, or anything we wanted to go back over? I appreciate that was pretty whirlwind.
Yeah, I've got a question, Jack. So we get growers here that plant seed cane. I'll say, Jason, on the side of block 2-2, we've got 12 rows of this variety, 6 rows of that variety, and 8 rows of that variety. Do you guys have a row generator built in here based off AD lines that we can just say, put it to 8 rows on the current configured row spacing? Or do we have to draw it?
I know an answer I'd give the grower. Something fierce.
Mixed.
Yeah, mixed. Yeah.
No, we don't have that yet, but it is something that has come up in these conversations with Kane, and then also there's a couple of parallels that we can draw, of course, in with horticulture or tree crops rather. So it is something that we're quite interested in doing, but at the moment, no. To be able to just input a row spacing and then be able to allocate a variety per row, we have the ability to. We can have management zones within a block. Blocks, sub blocks basically, but not at that granular level that you're talking about. It's a level of complexity that we didn't want to start with because we knew we'd probably still be there trying to deal with that.
I know you're paying for this. Just looking at the solution.
Well, good. Well, good. Thank you so much for your time. It's been really good.
No worries.
Great demo, and really appreciate you giving up a couple of hours. So thanks again.
Good, thanks for the invite, Tim, and also to I'm not sure I know who the sponsors are of this session, but thanks for the inclusion and the opportunity to I suppose to have a look at and you're probably the first group to other than on the individuals to actually see this. So thanks for your time and your feedback. We're always open to comment as to things that you value to include. We'll just put them in the list, and we don't lose the list. We just reprioritize it.
Yeah. And is it best to go to backpaddock.com.au or Opterra now as your main? Where do they get more information?
Yeah, you can go to opterra.net.au or jump on the BackPaddock website, and there's a chat there as well. Opterra, there's some information, but if you go to the BackPaddock website, there'll be a chat there. You can talk directly to Pete or Katie, or also call up. All the contact details will be there.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Tim.
Talk soon.
Thank you.
See ya.
Thanks, guys. Cheers.
Bye.